Hello my dear friends, how are you? I hope I find you in good health. I'm Mari Theriger and today I'm going to talk about the serpent and the egg. A very old myth which gave origins to a certain extent to a very old cult of the serpent. But today I'm not going to talk about its origins, but instead speak a little bit about this myth in general terms. Just before we start this video, I've already made a video about the serpent of paganism, which, if you have the time, of course, obviously, just click on this information icon on the right upper corner, your right upper corner, and you can watch that video and others I will recommend in there. On that video, I have already expressed certain notions of the ancient serpent cult predating Indo-Europeans, and indeed, both the serpent cult and the myth of the serpent and the cosmic egg are quite ancient, from an indigenous animistic past. Also, and this is where I want to get, because of that video, the serpent of paganism, there were some questions around the Scandinavian pagan motif of Thor, the god, trying to fish out of the world serpent Jormungandr, the great world serpent, and also the figure of the dragon Nidhogr in the Norse myth as a symbol of chaos and an evil entity, supposedly. So I also did a video focusing precisely on that motif of a pagan god trying to cause harm to a pagan religious symbol of fertility and protection, which doesn't make much sense, does it? And I have expressed that Thor causing harm in any way to Jormungandr is a Christian motif, but some people might have got the wrong impression about this. And not a lot of people, actually, only about 8 or 9 that somewhat misunderstood the main subject of that video, and at some point I felt like I was talking to a wall. This is not the case of people being rude or showing any sort of hatred towards me or just being trolls. Nothing of the sort. These were people, 8 or 9 people, that clearly shown some doubts and had arguments sort of against what I have expressed in that video, but their arguments are actually in favor of what I have expressed on that specific video about the serpent of paganism, which was the original video that made me do the one about Thor against Jormungandr. So I would like to help those people and clear up some things before we start our main subject of today. But of course, when I said that Thor fighting Jormungandr and the perception of Nidhogr being an evil being, I said that those two cases are Christian motifs and interpretations. I didn't mean it as exclusively or originally Christian. What I meant in those specific cases, those specific videos, is that the denigrating image of the serpent or dragon in Old Norse myths was greatly fomented by Christians. Now, let me explain. The religious motif of a sky deity killing, hunting, causing some harm to a great serpent isn't exclusively Christian, as you have already and rightly pointed out. We have the case of Vritra, for instance, a Vedic serpent or dragon in Hinduism, an adversary of Indra, the guardian deity, the king of the highest heaven, a sky deity. If we look at the concept of the Naga, it is a good concept to understand the serpent cult predating the Indo-European religious expressions seen in Hinduism. But I shall talk about that further ahead. In Hinduism, there is a mixture between the old and the new, or rather, a mixture between the pre-Indo-European and pre-Indo-Iranian religions based on earth cults and the Indo-European and Indo-Iranian religions based on mostly sky gods, sky deities. In Greek mythology, another example, we have Apollo killing Python, a great serpent, living at the very center of the earth. Python is the exact same thing as Nidhogr, the animistic notion of the energy of the earth itself. In the Greek myths, this serpent became a late enemy of the Olympian sky god Apollo. This myth, like the myth in Hinduism previously spoken, expresses the same religious motif, the same actual historical truth of the subjugation of the religious concepts of Indo-Europeans over the primordial earth cults of the pre-Indo-European peoples. These myths are not fantasy, they express realities of the societies of the past. These myths of the serpent being killed by a sky deity reflects the serpent cult, the worship of the living energy and living entity of the earth of a pre-Indo-European past, suffering changes in the religious panorama when in contact with Indo-European religious concepts and beliefs in sky deities. This is what I've been trying to explain to you. Indo-European religious beliefs in sky deities were forced upon the peoples that existed before them and had their own cults, their own worship. And the serpent cult is one of the oldest cults still around, fortunately. The serpent being killed by a sky deity is not something strictly or originally Christian, but on that video I have focused on that aspect which was greatly fomented by Christians, obviously in medieval Scandinavia. Christianity is also a religion based on a sky deity, with the same religious motifs expressed in the Indo-European and Indo-Iranian religions. The Christian god, or rather the god in Abrahamic religious motifs, was once a storm god, just like the storm sky gods of the Indo-Europeans, reflected in many cultures that adopted those same religious motifs. I will develop a little bit more on this further ahead. But another great example, one of you expressed, what about Sigurd killing Fafnir? Well, Fafnir's account comes in the Icelandic Volsunga saga, which is a late 13th century account, Catholic period. But the account seems to be the written record of an earlier oral tradition, as it is evident from the Ramsund carving in Sweden, which dates to the 11th century. And, as I have said in that video, the 11th century in Sweden marks precisely the Christianization of Sweden. But also, this might follow an earlier tradition. Again, I repeat, slaying the dragon or serpent isn't exclusively a Christian motif, but it is also expressed in many Indo-European mythologies. It's clear that the serpent cult is pre-Indo-European and belongs to the earth-based religions and expressions of faith before Indo-European religious beliefs based mostly on sky deities. You know which other religions are based on sky deities? Abrahamic ones. Christianity, for instance, an entire cult based on a sky deity. It is the exact same religious motif of the sky deity fighting the serpent of the ancient pagans. Christianity not only is based on Judaism, but it is also greatly based on classical myths, and it was a Roman creation to control the Roman province of Judea. So naturally, it has the same religious basis of pagan cultures based on Indo-European religious motifs. The serpent cult is indeed pre-Indo-European, without a doubt, but this specific account in that video, Thor fighting or fishing the world serpent, was greatly fomented by Christianity, which is a religion based, mostly in great part, on Roman religious concepts, which in turn are based on Indo-European religious motifs. This all goes down eventually to Indo-European sky deities versus primordial earth cults and worship. Even the god within Abrahamic religious beliefs was once a storm god, very similar to the many storm and weather gods of the Indo-Europeans. Eastern religious beliefs versus the Western earth cults and worships. The serpent cult is actually a Western European belief which spread from the Iberian Peninsula, more or less 20,000 years ago, spreading into the rest of Europe and subsequently into the rest of the world. But more on that on some other video. Yes, the serpent cult started, or it seems to have started, in the Iberian Peninsula and spread all over the place. So, surprise. So, are we clear now? A sky god or any other entity fighting or killing the serpent isn't exclusively Christian. It's Indo-European. And the subjugation of such religious beliefs over the earlier pagan beliefs, over animistic indigenous beliefs, the original forms of spirituality. But in Scandinavia, this religious motif was greatly fomented by Christians. The so-called modern nowadays pagans that are absolutely fascinated with Indo-Europeans hate to admit that Indo-European religious beliefs are very, very similar to Christian beliefs and other such Abrahamic beliefs. Indo-Europeans obviously came first, but they didn't just influence ancient European and Asian cultures. They also influenced greatly Middle Eastern pagan cultures, and vice versa, of course, which in time started to develop into the Abrahamic religious beliefs we know of today, and the belief in a sky deity, just as Indo-Europeans were absolutely focused on sky deities. The earth gods and goddesses and serpent cults and everything else linked to the earth isn't Indo-European, it is pre-Indo-European. Most pagan European and Asian religions are not exclusively the product of Indo-Europeans. Such religions are a mixture of Indo-European beliefs with ancient native cultures. Cultural syncretism. Now, let's start our today's video. Finally. The serpent and the egg is an important religious, spiritual and philosophical motif representative of the creation of the cosmos. The symbol of an egg and a serpent coiling around it, perhaps this representation is best known or immediately associated to the Orphic mysteries. The egg signified the cosmos, and the serpent encircled is the fiery creative spirit. In ancient philosophies, the egg represents the soul of the philosopher itself. The serpent is all the mysteries surrounding the philosopher and his or her quest for knowledge and the hidden mysteries. When the shell is broken, man, humankind, emerges from the embryonic state of physical existence where he or she had remained in the first stages of period of philosophical initiation. The cosmic egg became a universal symbol of the cosmos itself. In many ancient religions, the egg is a container of the universe. The egg symbolizes birth and potential. It contains in itself everything in its raw state, primordial state, the beginning of all things, the first vestiges of consciousness yet to be awakened. The ancient symbol of the serpent coiled around an egg was originally attributed to the mythical founder of the Orphic mysteries, Orpheus. It was a religion centered on the teachings of the origins of life, procreation, immortality, morality, creativity, and wisdom. Even though the serpent and the egg myth isn't originally from Greece, the cosmic egg became well known by the name of the Orphic egg in the ancient Greek Orphic tradition. It is from this ancient religion and philosophical conceptions that the more archaic myth of the serpent and the egg was best preserved, although, of course, with new religious and philosophical ideas of that period brought into this myth, but still the basic idea remained more or less the same. So, let's start from there. The Greeks called the serpent Ophis, which symbolizes divine wisdom descending upon the material world, upon the matter. Ophis was once a serpent god, which since ancient times was the emblem of wisdom among the Neolithic peoples of Western Europe. In the ancient world, the cult of the serpent grew and spread from west to east, and eventually in the ancient civilizations of the late Bronze Age and Iron Age, this cult gained phenomenal proportions and obviously influenced many cultures and many religions. It is interesting to see that in the Ophite legends, Jesus, or Christos, was born of a serpent and not of a divine man, meaning that the serpent here represents divine wisdom or Holy Spirit, as in divine spiritual entity. That is, Jesus became a son of the divine. Not the son of the divine, but a son of the divine, among others, due to his initiation into the science of the serpent. Meaning that figures of great wisdom, metaphorically, were the children of the serpent due to their initiation into the cult of the serpent and the wisdom they gathered. This is something that Christians obviously omit. I mean, just imagine acknowledging their own God as being the very son of the serpent, a symbol, as you know it, they greatly despise, and even it is the representation of the devil. Anyway, and indeed, in the Greek Orphic tradition, from the cosmic egg, the primordial hermaphroditic deity Phanes came forth. Phanes means manifester or revealer, and is related to the Greek words for light and to shine forth, as well as the Latin Lucifer, from lux vero, bringer of light, luminous, that which brings light, or in other words, this light is a metaphor for enlightenment, brought by knowledge or deep wisdom. But more on Lucifer and its origins on some other video, don't worry. But I can give you another example, of course, instead of Christ, because Christian stuff might be too hard on the more sensitive pagans. We have the case of Gautama Buddha, coming from the serpent lineage, from the Naga dynasty. Naga meaning serpent, actually meaning serpent of wisdom, which was the name given precisely to the initiated hermits by virtue of their great wisdom and spirituality, and they lived and performed their ceremonies in the underground. The serpent and the dragon were names given to ancient sages, the wisest members of the community. The Gnostic Ophites, for instance, used to honor the serpent because, as tradition says, it was the serpent that taught the mysteries to primitive man. We see this reflected, for example, in the serpent of the primordial garden, the serpent of knowledge that leads Eve to eat the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, and thus acquiring divine knowledge. On the other hand, the snake, or the serpent, is the symbol of the periodic renewal of nature and immortality and time, represented by Ouroboros, an ancient symbol depicting a serpent or a dragon eating or biting its own tail. The serpent symbolizes both the life of the earth and its invisible energy, as I've expressed on that video about the serpent of paganism. And it is the serpent that bites its own tail, as it symbolizes eternity on the spiritual plane and the eternity of the earth on the physical plane. According to the notions of ancient philosophers, the earth, like a snake or like a serpent, periodically sheds away its skin, resurfacing, resurging after each cycle in a rejuvenated state. Thus, due to its cyclical regeneration, the snake or the serpent or the dragon also represents the multiplicity of existences, reincarnation and or rebirth. That is the eternity of life. The priests of Egypt, Babylon and India called themselves serpents. The underground crypts of Thebes in Egypt were known by the name of Passages of the Serpent. The megalithic temple of Karnak in Brittany was, well, according to tradition, built by the same serpent man who built the Egyptian temple of Karnak. The Brittany Karnak means precisely the mount of the serpent. And the Druids of Brittany used to say, "I am a serpent, I am a Druid." According to the ancient wisdom that Plato speaks of, the Druid priests were supposedly descendants of the lost Atlanteans and symbolized their deities in the form of a serpent, an emblem of eternal divinity, time itself. And it's curious to see the similarities between the Druids of northwestern France with those of the British Isles, especially those of ancient Ireland, and the veneration of the serpent, even though, as you know it, Ireland never had actual serpents, but the cult of the serpent was very strong in there, brought by the late Chalcolithic and early Bronze Age peoples of the Iberian Peninsula again, who venerated the serpent long before all these civilizations and cultures previously spoken throughout this video. As you can see from their depictions of the myth of the serpent and the egg, and both together, engraved in standing stones of the early Neolithic. But we shall get to that. Don't worry, I'm building this up for you. It is curious to understand that the Brittany Karnak stone alignments present sinuosities identical to those of the serpent. In turn, the Ophites, the Egyptian Gnostic sages of the Fraternity of the Serpent, would have venerated in their ceremonies a living serpent as a symbol of wisdom, of the divine Sophia. According to the Ophite theory, the stone alignments were serpentine representations of the cosmos. That is, they considered that these monuments, these megalithic monuments, had the shape of a serpent, wavy, undulating, and that this wavy shape was the oldest sacred representation of the world itself. So this brings us to the hundreds of thousands of spiral motifs engraved in stone. Spirals, circles, representations of labyrinths, which started to be associated and used to represent the sun when Indo-European religious understandings spread and the focus on sky deities and mainly solar deities was adopted or incorporated into the older religious panoramas. But indeed, the spiral seems to have been an earlier representation of the serpent as a means to represent the world and the cosmos itself. I've already spoken a bit about the stone labyrinths and cult places in that other video about the serpent of paganism. Places or areas consecrated to the divine powers. Well, there's no point in repeating myself in here, but indeed, cult places of the ancient world are often perceived to be areas where the energy of the earth is felt more profoundly. And so cult places were built or erected in such places where the energy of the earth was felt more intensely, perceived to be the manifestation of the divine itself. And so the energy of the earth itself was understood in the animistic mind to be either a serpent or a dragon, moving on an undulating manner, slithering under the ground. The generator of force itself was understood to be a dragon in the underworld, in the middle of the earth, in its core, or a serpent. And we have many myths concerning this underworld dragon or serpent, including in Norse mythology, as I've spoken before, Nidhogg, the energy lines of cult places. Go watch those videos, my dear friends, to avoid having to repeat myself and bore you to death. Now, the serpent, for being oviparous or ovoviviparous, has become a symbol of wisdom. For example, in Egyptian symbology, the creator god emerges from the egg in the form of a winged serpent, which is the symbol of integral wisdom. In the symbolism of ancient Egypt, the symbol of the serpent associated with the egg referred to the cosmic creation. When not associated with the egg as a circle, the serpent is related to the mystery of the generation, the generator principle. In ancient times, there was a general belief that the universe existed in the beginning in the form of an egg. In Greek theogony, Dionysius, the firstborn, emerges from the egg of the world. The Neoplatonic Porphyry shows us precisely that the Orphic egg was part of Dionysian mysteries, as a representation of the world. In the Book of the Dead of ancient Egypt, the egg was the symbol of life in immortality and eternity, and also the sign of the generating matrix. So I think you start to get the point here, the main picture. As said before, the myth of creation involving the serpent and the egg, or just the egg as the representation of the cosmos and or of the world in its embryonic state, isn't a myth with Indo-European origins, as we already have vestiges about this myth in the Western European early Neolithic. But I think one of the best non-Indo-European mythologies, in great part non-Indo-European, surviving to our days, that reflects this myth, comes precisely from the Finnish tradition collated in the epic poem Kalevala. Of course, there are several known variations not given in the familiar redaction by Elias Lönnrot, which gives different creators, either the shaman god Venemoinen or the water mother Ilmatar. But at least they are in agreement where the cosmogony itself is concerned. In these variants, the cosmos is born from an egg, heated by the brooding of a great bird. The egg shatters in the sea. This also echoes the fire and water reaction of Indo-European traditions, of course. Fire and water, or fire and ice, heat and cold, coming together to form life. But the Finnish mythological accounts of creation in great part demonstrate other several non-Indo-European conceptions, such as this one of the egg. Uralic and Altaic shamanistic or shamanic traditions also provide further close parallels with the myth of the cosmic egg. Among the Yakuts, for instance, there are a variety of beliefs concerning eggs, one of which I think it's very mystical and I've chosen to speak about it today, is that it is the belief that shamans are born from eggs in nests in the branches of a giant fir tree that grows in the north. The shaman is etched by a mother bird of prey who dismembers the shaman and distributes the parts among the spirits of disease, who devour the body parts of the shaman. When the whole body has been eaten, the bird of prey mother restores the parts to life and wholeness. The shaman then has the power to cure the ailments represented by the various spirits. Now, it's interesting, this fusion between the primordial egg and the dismemberment of the body in shamanism. By the way, if you are interested in this shamanic dismemberment subject, please watch my video about Ymir, where I explain this dismemberment subject precisely, as well as the video on Kvasir. Now, the idea of the world being created from a cosmic egg and sometimes being assisted by heat and water is also plainly related to the motif of Yaranagarbha, the golden womb or golden egg, the golden embryo of the ancient Indian cosmogony. Also related, somewhat related, to the Chinese giant Pangu, who was himself born from an egg. As said before, this idea of a cosmic egg also occurs in the Orphic tradition of ancient Greece, which asserts that the first of all beings was Nyx, night, a bird with black wings who was impregnated by the wind and laid a silver egg from which Eros was born. The cosmos itself was also contained within this egg, this silver egg, and was revealed by Eros, the personification of sexuality. As you well know, the Greeks had several terms to describe different types of love, and Eros is the term to describe erotic love, the first kind of love, sexual passion and desire. The egg is an appropriate and obvious image to adopt as a cosmic symbol, I think, as its shape exactly corresponds to that once attributed to the cosmos, the heavens as an inverted bowl with a bowl beneath to contain the primal waters and the solid earth they surrounded, as is seen in Mesopotamian cosmology. Furthermore, the egg is an unambiguous symbol of potential life, and the process of hatching involves the breaking of the shell and the emergence of a living creature from the chaotic mass within. Ancient peoples, possibly, surely, may have noted the similarities between the embryo in an eggshell and the fetus floating in the amniotic sac, possibly. So, we seem to have several ideas for the creation of the cosmos, from the somewhat proto-Indo-European ideas of dismemberment that come from shamanism, dismemberment of a being, which I have not explored in here today, but on other videos I recommend you to watch. Don't worry, the links will be in the description of this video down below. Also, we have the idea from fire and water, or heat and cold, ice and fire, which seems to be related to Indo-European conceptions. The idea of clay and water, or earth and the primordial waters, mostly found in non-Indo-European cosmologies outside Europe, in the Middle East. And finally we have the idea of the primordial egg, the cosmic egg, which may be the oldest conceptions of creation of life and the cosmos itself. The primordial egg, or cosmic egg, is the representation of a microcosmos, since it contains the world in itself, and for this reason it is also known as the egg of the world. Its character of total unity and its germinative function make the egg the emblem of the origins, of the beginning, of the mystery of creation. In Druidic Gaul, the egg of the world was represented by the serpent's egg. The Druids called it ovum anguinum. The Druids believed they had found the secret of knowledge, of all knowledge, in this egg, this specific egg, ovum anguinum, which is a serpent's nest. Innumerable serpents coil themselves into a ball during the summertime. Thus, they make it so that it is held together by a bodily secretion and by their saliva. It is called an anguinum, and this ovum anguinum is the stone of vipers, or the nest of snakes that Pliny talks about. It was an object considered magical by the Druids and used by the Celts, who hung it around their necks like an amulet. And even today, farmers in the north of Portugal, nowadays Portugal, believe that in a certain place where there is a treasure beneath the earth, it is guarded by a nest of snakes that keep away the curious. This is a very old belief that goes far back to the serpent cult, or the snake cult, and the serpent god or serpent deity of the ancient Iberian Peninsula, an underworld deity precisely. Now, it's curious to see that the ancient Greeks called the territory where it is nowadays Portugal, called it Ophusa, meaning the land of serpents. In Portugal there were a people called Ofis, serpents, the people who live in the mountains. These people worshipped serpents, and their serpent cult is far older than the one from ancient Greece. These people somewhat appear in early Bronze Age in archaeological evidences, and archaeological findings of the serpent cult demonstrate that this cult lasted until the Iron Age and the coming of the Romans. In classical serpent cults from both the Roman world and the Hellenic world, we see much influence from this Iberian serpent cult. And this Iberian serpent worship dates back at least from the early Western Iberian Neolithic, closer to 10,000 years ago, in the archaeological findings. As we see engravings on standing stones demonstrating the serpent and the egg, the myth of creation spoken throughout this video. This ancient cult never truly stopped. To this day, there are still those who maintain this serpent cult and venerate the ancient serpent deity. In fact, according to tradition, this serpent cult goes back to 20,000 years ago, more or less, starting in the west of the Iberian Peninsula and spreading eastwards. Although that is a story from history which someday I might tell you all about it. The symbolism of the egg comes close to symbols such as the cave, the shell, the navel, which are assumed to be representations of the center of the world. In the continental Celtic tradition, the notion of center expresses the sacred, both the spiritual and the temporal levels, as well as the description of a central territory governed by a supreme sovereign or king of the world, which escapes all notions of time and space. This idea was often represented by the snake or the serpent biting its own tail, Ouroboros again, in which the center was the origin of everything, the starting point of all things. It is the main point without form and without dimension, the primordial unity. From this point of origin, all things are produced, all things are created. This idea of centrality is reflected in the construction of the temple or the sacred space associated with a physical and symbolic reality of the center. The sanctuary thus appears as an enormous potential of sacred energy. Many of the ancient temples or sacred spaces were only constituted by a stone or a base or an altar that symbolized the centrality of everything. And in many cultures, that stone would be resting on something representative of the serpent or the snake, as it is the case of ancient Greece. In Delphi, the center of the world was marked by a white stone representing the cosmic egg, the center of creation, and this stone rested on the tomb of the python serpent. In all traditions, the serpent is associated with the Chthonian force of telluric energy. The cosmic egg, the sacred center and stronghold of the mysterious power of generation, is sometimes associated with the cave, as has been said before, in the sense of being the archetype of the maternal matrix, a symbol of origin, rebirth, initiation, as we see in the serpent cults, in which the great majority of performances, ceremonies are underground, in a cave or in tombs or in the catacombs of a sacred temple. The cave, a grotto, and the underground are synonyms with the den of the world. The religious initiations or ceremonies performed there represented the return to the nutrient mother, the natural force that provides nourishment, the return to the sacred womb. And we continue to see in great mythologies of different cultures the association between the serpent or dragon and the underworld, the womb of the earth. I have another video about that precisely, Naustrond, and I recommend you to watch that one. But even if you can't see this information icon, don't worry, just go down below in the description of this video and you will have the links to the videos in there. Both the ritual of Eleusis or Eleusinian cult and the cult of Mitra consecrate the cave as the place predestined to be a receptacle of energy in the heart of the earth, like the Lusitanian cult of the god Endovelicus, being a Chthonian deity, and the dragon Nidhogr, also from Nordic mythology, that represents the central energy of the earth, the core. The cave is therefore the birthplace. The underworld symbolizes latent life, and it brings the individual in direct communication with the telluric forces of death and life and germination, as we see in the case of Jesus Christ again, dying and being reborn in a cavernous tomb. And here we see classical cult influences of Mitra and such other pagan conceptions, making a link between the underworld and the powers of life and rebirth. Now, clay eggs have also been found in several graves in Russia and Sweden. In Boeotian tombs in Greece, there were statues of Dionysius with an egg in his hand. In excavations in the desert of Mari, egg-shaped tombs were discovered where the deceased lay in fetal positions. As we understand in the Neolithic burial mounds that have an oval shape, domed aspect, representing the dome of the earth, the womb of the earth, the primordial egg, and the dead in a fetal position. And in Gallo-Roman graves, there were serpent eggs, and this tradition persisted until the early Christian Middle Ages. And also the case of, obviously, the Neolithic and Chalcolithic Iberian menhirs and standing stones and dolmens, where offerings were found of polished stones representing eggs. The egg does seem to have been an universal symbol of life and thus of the divine, an animistic concept of the representation of the divine force of nature and of the earth associated with periodic renewal and recreation and rebirth. And at some point this symbol was associated with the serpent. Or, in other words, it seems that the entire spiritual understanding revolving around the egg and the idea of creation was brought into the primordial serpent cult. And the serpent being the symbol associated with divine wisdom and protection. The serpent enveloping the egg, protecting creation and all life in its embryonic stage, a fusion. Of the multiple meanings of the serpent, this symbol occasionally takes on the character of an essentially telluric animal, in the sense that it has the ability to slide through the smallest crevices in the terrain. By its crawling wave motion, the snake evokes universal energy power. In this sense, it can be considered as the fertilizing power of the divine matrix, often associated with the mother goddess or the natural power of fecundity. In this form, the snake or the serpent becomes a fantastical animal from the underworld that we see in many mythologies, meandering, slithering in the interior of the earth as an underground watercourse or as a telluric current that is located in certain places underground where the old sacred structures to capture the universal powers were built on, which are, above all, archaic places of worship, the representative sacred wooden beams, for instance, from the Tree of Life, or the megalithic structures such as the standing stones, menhirs, and dolmens, also the temples, the old churches and cathedrals built on top of the old temples and sacred spaces, often in natural places, sacred springs, or places with peculiar geographical features that our ancestors perceived to be places from which the forces of the earth, the divine earth, the dragon lines, the ley lines, emanated power from, or the power of the earth itself, perceived to be divine, was felt more profoundly in such places. These currents of cosmic origin run simultaneously in the body of the earth, in the body of mankind also, and in the celestial body. Of course, in the Buddhist tradition, the serpent is associated with the energy of the cosmic consciousness, Kundalini, of the Sanskrit kundal, which means coil, an allusion to the spiral position of the serpent, as you well know, of course. And according to this tradition, the strength of the cosmic consciousness is asleep inside every human being. This consciousness rests like a sleeping snake, coiled in a spiral at the base of the spine. In order to access higher states of consciousness prior to the coming of mystical enlightenment, the individual must keep in mind that waking it can endanger his or her mental health, which reminds us of hundreds of mythological accounts and heroic tales and folklore of a certain character waking up the sleeping dragon in a cave, or waking up or fighting an underworld serpent and defeating the dragon or the serpent, or in any way overcoming the situation, and the character has access to the treasure the dragon or serpent protected. Normally a treasure of gold, perhaps as a metaphor for something shining, remoting to illumination, awakening of the consciousness, enlightenment. And indeed such characters become very powerful. But there is always a curse in the treasure itself or in the dragon's hoard that leads the character to a disastrous fate when the character becomes too proud or too overconfident, well, endangering one's mental health. You remember Sigurd and Fafnir, for instance, previously spoken in the beginning of this video. The Kundalini energy is powerful and is composed of 3 nadi. Nadi, a tube or pipe or energy stream that circulate through the body. These nadi are represented by 3 serpents. The first 2, called Ida and Pingala, intersect like a caduceus, an ancient Greek or Roman herald's wand, typically one with 2 serpents twined around it, carried by the messenger god Hermes or Mercury. And these 2 nadi cross in 7 sides along the 3rd serpent called Sushumna, and identified as the spinal cord. In there, the 7 energetic shells are situated, the 7 vibratory levels. And according to Greek tradition, before living under the same roof as her husband and joining him in nuptials, the young bride had to stay overnight in the dormitory of Artemis, goddess of the virgin nature, to receive the influence of the earthen currents in activity in that dormitory, to strengthen her capacity to favorably grow the seed that she would receive. Always this idea of telluric currents that in many traditions are called serpent lines or dragon lines, in an energetic relationship between the earth and mankind, influencing the fertilizing aspects in all things and of all things. Another example, the myth of Hercules, which tells us that the great solar hero who overcame the 12 tests, as you know, still in the cradle had domesticated 2 great serpents, the cosmic and the earthly snake, which were preparing to attack him. We understand from this, perhaps, that this mythical hero had the power to control these 2 serpents or energies, thus dominating the laws of nature, both the cosmic laws and the earthly laws. In the Greco-Roman tradition, the serpent is the symbol of wisdom and knowledge. For instance, the gods Asclepius, Serapis, Pluto are gods with the attributes of the serpent. All of them heal, and manage physical and spiritual health, including enlightenment, which is a transmutation of the impact of consciousness on man with ecstatic phenomena. We have the example of the Lusitanian god Endovelicus as well, as previously mentioned. From the ancient Lusitania, one of his animals is also the serpent, being a god of the underworld and of medicine, but also of illumination, enlightenment, and knowledge. And tradition tells us that when sleeping in the temple of Endovelicus, people would have prophetic dreams and were cured of their physical and mental illnesses. So, there you have, my dear friends, a few notions on the serpent and the egg symbology and myth. I honestly hope you have enjoyed this video and that it was useful in some way. Thank you so much for watching. See you on the next video. And as always, tack för idag.